This is the new Sony 28-70 f2 G Master lens. It's significantly smaller and lighter than the Canon version by about a third or so on the weight department, but how well does it actually perform, and is it going to be something that is legitimately game-changing? Let's check it out. This is a pre-production lens. I don't get to keep it. I'm sending it back to Sony today, and I'm actually filming this video about 3 weeks or so before the actual announcement. That being said, I have had it for the last 3 weeks or so. So all that to say, I don't get to keep this. Sony's not seeing this video, any of that kind of stuff, but wanted to give as much possible disclosure as I could. Now, I'm mainly going to be giving this as the perspective of a full-time wedding photographer. That is my primary thing, but I'm also diving in a little bit to the wedding filmmaking side of things. So this lens in particular is the most exciting lens that has come across my desk in quite a while. It's been something that I know Sony users, I'm sure Nikon users, we've all generally been sort of jealous of the Canon model. I know specifically, like I could count at least 10 people off the top of my head, probably 20 people that specifically shoot the Canon system for their 28-70mm lens. And while I don't personally own that lens, back when I was using Canon, I definitely borrowed it a few times from friends, and it is a fun lens. But I will say that this is definitely the version of that lens that the vast majority of people are going to want to use. So we'll get to image quality in a bit, but I think the most important thing about this lens is going to be obviously its specs at being at f2, but also the size of things. So when we actually go to zoom in here, we start at 28mm, and that is the most compact this lens gets. And that is the full extent. So I believe that we are in under an inch as far as the amount of forward zoom you're getting. So it's not fully internal. You are having a little bit of play there, but it's, again, less than an inch. Now, the easiest lens to compare it to, and the lens that they actually kind of compared it to as well in the press briefing, is the 135 GM. So you can see that the 135 is like a generally decent comp, but it's definitely a little bit larger. The 135 actually feels a little bit more dense than the 28-70 does. And in practice, I feel like I felt like the 28-70 was actually an easier carry. I know that doesn't make a lot of sense, but I think it's because it's a little bit more spread out here and it just feels lighter. And the 135 feels more dense. So definitely not the perfect comp, but if you do have the 135 in your office or in your lens bag or something like that, and you want to have an idea of what this lens kind of feels like, I mean, that's going to be a decent comp. Now, another lens that this is going to be compared to is going to be the Sigma 28-45. I don't have that lens in studio right now, but the lens I do have is the Samyang 35-150. It's another like power, just incredible range, fast aperture zoom lens. And for those that don't need 28mm, it is a really cool little comp here, but you will see that the Samyang here is significantly bigger, significantly heavier. And while it does go significantly further at 150, it does stop down throughout the range, ending up at 2.8. So it's going to be one of the things that I'm sure some people are going to look at, but I wanted to kind of compare that as well. Now, as primarily a photographer, I haven't used a lot of zoom lenses in a long time. Actually, I made a video about my 28-70 f2.8 Sigma and the reasons I actually did like this lens. Now, it's going to be kind of silly because this is the smallest little 2.8 zoom lens that I've ever used. And then this is going to be an f2 lens. So you can see the massive difference here. But here's where I think that this actually makes a lot of sense, because you're getting a full extra stop of light, making this a lot more usable for more portions of the day for someone like myself. So when I'm photographing with my Sony cameras, the vast majority of time I'm using the G Master lenses, the prime lenses specifically. So on my camera is typically the 20mm G lens, the 35mm GM, the 50mm GM 1.4, and that's kind of where I'm sticking with for the majority of the time. I'm most likely going to pick up the 85 1.4 GM Mark II, but if you are a prime shooter like I am normally, this is going to be the difference that you're going to be looking at. Honestly, it does look pretty big in the differences here, but you're just going to have to ask yourself, okay, do I want to carry two cameras with two different sets of lenses to essentially get most of the same thing? Now, if you're someone that just absolutely loves f1.4, I totally get you. I love f1.4. I love f1.2 even. And I'm always someone that's going to be carrying around more than one camera at a time, no matter what as well, just for some sort of backup. I don't want to be ever in a situation where I only have one camera on me. So while this is going to be kind of like a one and done solution for a lot of people, I still would always make sure that if I was using this as kind of a one and done solution, that it wasn't the only camera on my person. Now, back onto a camera. It's going to feel a lot like a traditional 24-70 lens. If you ever were in the DSLR days, it definitely feels more along those lines, except for it's still smaller and lighter even than a traditional 24-70 lens. And while if you follow this channel, you know that I shoot with Leica cameras and I really actually like the A7CR and some other smaller cameras. I have been carrying this around and taking it on family walks. I've been taking it to different places. I've been using it quite a bit. And while I probably wouldn't carry this around as a personal camera, it is 100% something that I would carry around if I was going to be doing dedicated photography or video work. And as a wedding photographer, I'm often bringing at least one Sony camera. For the past couple of years, I've been bringing two. I've been having those be kind of like my main things for weddings, one on each side with a set of prime lenses. And then I'm always bringing like a film camera or using one of my Leicas or using a Hasselblad camera or something like that as kind of like my auxiliary setup. But the thing about this is that it's really kind of giving you a lot more of that pop from a f2 aperture that I was always missing whenever I would try to use something like a zoom lens. I think for video stuff, zoom lenses and f2.8 can be really, really useful. I find myself stopping down when I'm doing video a lot more than when I'm doing photos. And I will say that specifically for elopements, especially, this is going to be 100% a tool that I'm going to be picking up, because the versatility of getting a not extreme wide, but a semi-wide at 28mm, it's usually where I'm sticking. When I'm shooting with my prime lenses, my ideal two primes, especially for an elopement setting, are going to be 28 and 50. Giving me 28 and 70 is just a little extra added bonus there to add a little bit of compression. And I already have multiple elopements planned for the next year where I'm specifically flying in helicopters and things like that, where I know that this is going to be a very, very useful tool to not have to have multiple cameras out and be able to just kind of run and gun with something and still get that crazy f2 pop that I'm looking for in my work. Now, in terms of sharpness, this thing is really, really sharp. It's not going to be as wildly sharp as a G Master Prime lens, but it's going to be pretty darn close. Now, sharpness isn't always everything, and I love good character as much as anybody, but in terms of like a one and done, buy one lens and use it for the vast majority of things you're doing on a wedding day specifically, I'm definitely going to want to lean into sharpness over not having sharpness, because I can always dial that back, but adding sharpness is just not something that I'm really interested in my work. All right, friends, we are out here with the new 28-70 f2 GM. Absurd lens, obviously, been probably talking about this for a while now at this part of the video anyway. But here's my problem. Wedding season just ended. Portrait season is on the rise, but it is just kind of raining all the time. So I'm taking one for the team here, using myself as the model of sorts, and am much more looking for what this thing is rendering, how that stuff looks. The light here even, like I have to like kind of look up to get the lighting right, just because it's a super flat day. But I'm gonna take some sample images, unfortunately, of myself via the tripod, but we'll be able to see a little bit more out of this thing and give you a better idea of what like portraiture and how well that f2 really pops things out of the background. And one of the things that I realized here is just that the bokeh looks really, really good. The separation is really good. I would have zero issues taking environmental portraits. You can see even in the full body portraits, you're getting a lot of separation as well. The only thing you're really running into is at the extreme corners in some distances at some of the further focal lengths, you're getting some slight movements in the bokeh. I believe that's just down to the fact that the front element here isn't massive, and so you're going to get some of that, not even necessarily cat's eye, but it almost starts to block off some of the bokeh at the extreme corners. It's nothing that I particularly have any issue with whatsoever, but just kind of wanted to throw that out there. Now, if you followed any of the videos about Sony cameras, you know that I'm not going to need to get into autofocus performance a lot, but just like any modern Sony lens, it has, linear motors. We're focusing incredibly fast. They're saying it's keeping up to the A9 III and the A7R5 stuff. It can focus to 120 frames per second. And while I haven't even needed to test this because it's not something I'm really needing to do, you could use this as a sports lens. I've photographed my kids running around and had absolutely tack sharp images the entire time. So again, wildly versatile, wickedly fast lens. Now, I wouldn't consider this lens a macro lens at all, but it actually does have surprisingly good macro reproduction. At 70 millimeters and actually across the entire range, you get down to 0.38 meters. So very, very close. And if you can see the distance between the front of the element here and the very, very back edge, so like the front edge of this filter right here, this is your distance in terms of, well, I guess the distance between the sensor and here is the full distance or whatever, but you are getting quite a bit of macro reproduction, and this is how close you can actually get to your subject while using this. You're definitely not going to be getting like an actual macro lens, but for a lot of things, especially for close details and things like that at weddings, especially if you have a larger megapixel sensor like the A7R5, you can absolutely get away with cropping into that APS-C mode and getting some pretty tight shots. Now, the other thing that I've been using this on significantly is the Sony FX3. So this is my kind of like main go out run and gun video camera. And sure, when I was first briefed on this lens, I was slightly disappointed because I was kind of hoping when I first heard about this that it might be a 24 millimeter lens. And specifically, this is because when you are doing video work, having a wider focal length that you can better handhold ends up just being really, really useful. But for better or for worse, one of the things that Sony does really, really, really well with their native lenses is that when dialing in both the standard IBIS stabilization as well as that slight punch in on the active, they just do such a good job with their active stabilization that I can definitely handhold a 28 millimeter native lens better than I can handhold like a 24 millimeter that is from like a third-party manufacturer like Sigma or something. So while you definitely don't get the actual focal length of 24 millimeters, the main thing that I'm looking for is something that I can have a little bit of movement with and can still handhold and feel good about. And 100%, this is going to be the lens that I'm doing a lot of wedding work with, and it's going to basically live on my FX3 for any video work that I'm doing because, I mean, if you haven't made it this far in this video and don't think that I'm going to buy this lens, you're probably crazy because it's definitely the lens that I've been waiting for a long time. And I think a lot of other wedding photographers and people that are doing a lot of run and gun video stuff as well are going to be pretty excited about. And if you want the standard 24-70, obviously you have that. And they make the 20-70 as well. That's an f4. It just depends on what you're looking for. All that to say, if you are okay with 2.8 and you're a photographer, and especially if you're stopping down as a filmmaker and don't care about the corrections and things, the size and weight of this thing and everything I've ever said about this lens in my other reviews still 100% stands packed, and I'm standing behind. But I will say every time I take this out to do filming of myself and things like that, there are just small annoyances that I have not found about this beast here. So overall, this thing is absolutely fantastic. It is 100% going to be a lens that I'm going to be buying probably day one, combining the perfect focal length range for me for photography and still being wide enough. So honestly, if you are looking for a one and done lens, if you are someone especially that would prefer to not use prime lenses, wants the flexibility of a zoom lens, all those things together make this an easy buy. Currently, I don't have the full pricing, but it's supposed to be under $3,000, so comparable to the Canon lens. And while that pricing obviously is going to exclude a ton of people, myself included, I don't have that much money to just randomly spend on a lens right now. Probably going to be selling multiple things to end up getting this, but it just does replace so many different things for someone like me that makes it worthwhile. So while it would be nice for this to be 24 millimeters, I'm going to 100% take the size and I'm assuming even pricing savings here to make this a 28-70. It's going to be significantly more versatile to me as a photographer to be able to have that extra reach. And again, the size and weight savings of this over something like the Canon version are going to be something that I think a lot of people are going to be much more willing to switch over to the Sony system for this. Huge ups to Sony for making this happen and making this into a lens that is small enough that I would carry this around all day long. So thanks so much for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already. And then you can check out my video on the A7R5 versus A9 III video up here. Check out my video on the Samyang 35-150 up here, and I will see you in one of those videos.